morning. My name is Keith Fraze, and I am your worship associate this morning. Please rise in body or spirit. Join me in singing hymn number 163 in your gray hymnal, For the Earth Forever Turning.
Good morning. My name is April Strittmater, and I am the Vice President of the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley. Whether you have been with this congregation a decade or more, or if this is your first time visiting, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, we welcome you. Whatever your theological stance, we welcome you. Whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. Whatever your heritage, we welcome you. We respectfully acknowledge the territory on which our church building sits as the ancestral homelands of the Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger people. We have two announcements this morning. The Board of Trustees would like to thank everyone who made our Christmas Eve service so wonderful, from Ann Pearl, chair of the worship committee, to all the worship associates who read that night, to the choir, and to everyone who decorated and brought food to make the service so special for all. Announcement 2. Community circles are small groups of 6 to 8 people who meet once a month to build relationships and deepen connections with members of our community. These small groups nurture spiritual development and foster individual growth. If you are interested in joining a circle, look for the table in the fellowship hall to sign up for one. For the most up-to-date information on these topics and others, please refer to our weekly e-news and check our website frequently. And please join us for conversation after the service. If you are present in the fellowship hall, if you're present in the sanctuary, then please join us for coffee and conversation in fellowship hall. If you are watching on the live stream, please click the link for the Zoom coffee hour, which is found in the Saturday reminder in your email. If you are just recently joining us and would like to receive our weekly e-news, please email us at uucroton@gmail.com with your name, and we will make sure you are added to our list. Also, please remember to silence your cell phones at this time. Once again, we welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley.
Good morning. It's so good to see you today. There's a poem by Goethe that was translated by Longfellow that says, "Over all the hilltops is quiet now. In all the treetops you can hear hardly a breath. The birds are asleep in the trees." Wait. All around us so much is happening. And when we gather in this meeting house with its many windows but one light reflecting through them, we remember that through the many rooms that we have come, we together in this moment, whether we are in the sanctuary or joining online, are sharing a common gathering, anchored in hope, in possibility, and love. Every week, to honor this sacred gathering, we invite the young adults of our congregation, the youth of our congregation, to go to our bell tower and ring our bell 8 times for our 8 principles of faith. So as those bells ring, may we remember the birds, the trees, the light, and the love that connects us. And may the compassion of strangers and those always seeking to help one another guide us as our values and bell sounds remind. May it be so.
Today's chalice lighting words are from Kathleen McTeague. Into this home, we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring compassionate hearts and a will towards justice. Into this home, we bring the courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home, we bring our joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering, we bless this place. In its shelter, we know ourselves blessed. Now, please join me in saying our unison affirmation. The words are in your order of service. Inspired by love, our mission is to seek our true nature, connect deeply and openly, and act for justice. Okay. Now, please rise and body your spirit and join us in singing our next hymn, number 159 in your gray hymnal, "This Is My Song."
This past Monday, our nation celebrated Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King holiday, reminding us that the work of justice and freedom was hard-fought and continues. Our Time for All Ages this morning is a selection from a sermon Dr. King gave in 1968 and his retelling of the Good Samaritan, a parable from the teacher Jesus. Dr. King says, one day a man came to Jesus and he wanted to raise some questions about vital matters of life. At points, this man wanted to trick Jesus to show him he knew a little more than Jesus knew and threw him off base. And the man asked, "Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor?" Now, that question could easily have ended up in a philosophical or theological debate. But Dr. King continued, Jesus instead immediately pulled that question from midair and placed it on a dangerous curve in the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. And he talked about a certain man who was attacked by robbers, injured and hurt on the side of the road. And two religious figures walked by this injured man, a Levite and a priest, and they passed by on the other side while this man was injured. They didn't stop to help. But then finally, a man of another race came by, a Samaritan. And that man got down from his horse and decided not to be compassionate by proxy. Instead, this Samaritan got down to the injured man, administered first aid, and helped carry him to an inn where he could heal. And the man paid for the costs of the inn. Jesus ended by saying, this was the good man, not the religious figures, but the one who was concerned about his neighbor. And Dr. King continued, now, we over the centuries use our imagination a great deal to try to determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop to help the man. At times, we say they were busy going to a church meeting and they had to get to Jerusalem so quickly and they didn't want to be late for the meeting. And at other times, we say maybe there was a religious restriction because they weren't supposed to touch another human body of 24 hours before the ceremonies. And Dr. King continues, and every now and again we wonder if maybe they weren't going to Jericho to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. That's a possibility. Maybe they felt it was better to deal with the problem from its root rather than get bogged down with helping one individual person. But Dr. King continued, I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the Jericho road is a dangerous road. I remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we got on that road, I said to my wife, Coretta, I can see why Jesus used this as a setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing. You start out in Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 feet above sea level. And by the time you get down to Jericho, 15 or 20 minutes later, you're about 2,000 feet below sea level. That's a dangerous road. And in the days of Jesus, it came to be known as the Bloody Pass. And you know, it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over at that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt that the man on the ground was merely faking it. And he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them. So the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this person, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came, and he reversed the question. If I don't stop to help this person, what will happen to him? Dr. King continued, let us tonight continue with greater readiness. Let us seek greater determination to help our neighbors. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation, he said, reflecting on the Good Samaritan in 1968. And it is still true and good to reflect on in 2024. May we be good neighbors. Amen. A moment, our youth are going to go into our amazing religious exploration program with Luke and Emily. So we'll sing a song in a moment. But let's remember, when we celebrate those holidays, when we don't have school on Monday, it's for reasons and stories we want to hold close. May it be so.
Let's sing 3 times through, first all together, and then take your pick when you want to join the round.
Today's reading is Inspiration by Elaine Equi. Poetry, for me, is a spiritual practice. Reading and writing it puts me in touch with something much bigger than myself, something intangible yet quite real. Because poems can be read in the context of other poems, it puts me in touch with the tradition, with writers of the past and also with writers of the present. I know some people have an aversion to the word spiritual because it has religious connotations. But the realm of the spirit is vaster than orthodoxies and institutions. Even if you're a total materialist, you can think of the spirit as the unknown, an uncharted realm of possibility. In poems, we converse and commune with the zeitgeist, or the spirit of the age. Another word to substitute for spirit might be silence, the nourishing interiority from which thoughts and ideas spring. One of my favorite definitions of poetry is an aphorism by Joe Brainard, evincing his characteristic simplicity and elegance. Poetry is that certain something we so often find missing. What I like best in this statement is the sense of discovery it points to. You read a poem you love, and it's as if you've once again discovered what poetry means to you. I must admit, I also like the vagueness of a certain something. You won't know what it is until you find it, and you won't find it unless you look. Let us now bear witness to the joys and sorrows experienced in our community. I light this first candle for all the suffering and the conflicts in the world, in Gaza and Israel, in South Sudan, Yemen, and Ukraine, and so many other places. Let's have a moment of silence for all those aching in the wider world. As our sorrows are real, so are our joys. I light this second candle for all care, kindness, and compassion unfolding among friends, families, and strangers in the world right now, in cities, towns, and villages. We are grateful for the love shared. As we hold and honor the sorrows and joys of the wider world, so do we also have personal joys and sorrows. Now is the time for our personal joys and sorrows. If you have a brief yet personally significant joy or sorrow that you are willing to share, please come up to the microphone and speak loudly so that everyone, including the people watching at home, can hear you. If you would prefer only to have a candle lit without speaking, please just stand or raise your hand, and I will light a candle for you.
Hi, good morning. I'm April. I'll just share a sorrow that thankfully turned into a joy, which was last Saturday. I fell playing basketball with 4 10-year-olds. And I'll just say I'm too old to fall. And so I hyperextended my knee, and I was pretty worried about, well, many years ago, before you guys knew me, I tore one of my ACLs, and that was a whole thing. So I was really concerned about how I would move through my life if I had another thing like that happen. But I'm fine, but I have just been like walking more deliberately and like really being mindful because, again, I'm too old to fall. But I did get credit for playing basketball with the 10-year-olds. So
April, I'm going to follow up on that because I tore my ACL and MCL about 3 years ago skiing. Never had surgery. So I live with the prospect of if I fall, what's going to happen? So I'm sort of thankful that it snowed this weekend. I know it meant we had to postpone the auction, but it gave Jim and I a chance to sort of escape to Vermont for like 24 hours. We drove up to southern Vermont and did some cross-country skiing around Bennington. And the whole time, April, I'm thinking to myself, okay, you can't fall, you can't fall. So we had a lovely time and came back last night. But I have to say, skiing in minus 11 degrees makes me appreciate why there are so many snowbirds who go south.
Hello, I'm Pat Krugman. I used to cross-country ski and loved it, and I can't take that chance with 2 hip replacements. I really miss it. I would like to light a candle of thanks. It's been a couple of really hard months for me, and I find it much easier to be the compassionate one rather than needing compassion. And I really appreciate those of you that have been very patient with me through an extremely difficult time. It's not over yet, but I just want to let you know it matters.
And I'll add a joy to this as well. Today is my daughter Adeline's 8th birthday, and she is at home relaxing and having a little lazy Sunday at her request. So. We also acknowledge all the unspoken joys and sorrows held within the sanctuary of our hearts, and all those people who have yet to find a spiritual home where they can share their joys and sorrows. Now is the time in our service for a moment of prayer, meditation, pause. Spirit of life and love, bigger than the universe, smaller than a grain of sand, be with us today on this cold Sunday in January. Remind us that time is precious. Give us the grace to cherish even the sight of our frozen breath. Let us remember that we can see one another, we can be with one another, and we can listen to the call of love and kindness even on the coldest days. Give us the grace to forgive ourselves, to grow, and to begin again. May it be so. One of the things that I always find humbling around this time of year as a preacher is the work of Coretta Scott King to preserve the legacy of the civil rights movement and her husband's sacrifice, and the advocacy work which was done to create the federal holiday in honor of Dr. King. And while it might not seem like it, that year in and year out effort involving talking and being patient and responding with love when so many people responded with skepticism, that is a sign of deep spiritual practice and patience and unfolding. So I remember her especially today. My friend, Reverend Katie McQuaig Lucas, is a minister in Houston, Texas. And she describes our faith this way. She says, Unitarian Universalists, we are a multi-faith community with love at the center, a sense of justice, and shared spiritual practices. And Reverend Katie often speaks of spiritual solidarity. While we might not all be on the exact same road, we support one another, respect one another, help one another. And I love Reverend Katie's definition, but it begs the question, what constitutes a spiritual practice? A spiritual practice or a spiritual discipline is an intentional, regular habit to encounter the sacred. A spiritual practice or a spiritual discipline is an intentional, regular habit of individuals and groups to encounter our deepest selves. And Reverend Kathleen McTeague, who we heard from in the chalice lighting, in a beautiful essay, she asked, how in the world can any of us manage a spiritual practice when our days are spent chaotically juggling work and family? She writes, a better question might be, since my spiritual life is not framed by monastic silence and contemplation,
Where can I find that life within the noise and activity and life that surround me? Where can I find that life within my life? In the early 19th century, there were many tensions among two wings of our faith ancestors, the American Unitarians, who, like us, were trying to find that life within the noise and activity that surrounded them. On the one hand, you had Christian Unitarians, often clergy and scholars, who argued for the use of reason as the primary tool to interpret Scripture. For them, the best spiritual practice was to study texts and compare them. One, like Hannah Adams, who I think is like the patron saint of Unitarian Universalist librarians, grew curious about different religious texts, and in her home in Massachusetts, just diligently worked to study and learn about Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism, and wrote one of the early comparative religious books. Others, like the boundary-breaking Black abolitionist and feminist Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, combined her daily study of Scripture with consistent and transformative work for justice. And on the other hand, we encounter a group unique to American Unitarians, the Transcendentalists, who were writers and activists who argued for a move away from only respecting the study of sacred text to instead elevate direct experience, justice-making, and nature as a source of spiritual teaching. Ralph Waldo Emerson, we have one of his books right next to Keith. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a Unitarian clergyman who actually resigned his pulpit to become a public essayist and lecturer. And he criticized more traditional Unitarian Sunday services at the time as corpse cold and lifeless when compared to the awe and wonder of encountering a snowstorm. Yet whether you were more of a Christian Unitarian or a Transcendentalist Unitarian, there was a strong emphasis on both sides of the tradition, according to Reverend Monroe Sycophus, on self-culture. American Unitarians in the 19th century especially believed in the idea of salvation by character. Your self-cultivation through study, service, and contemplation was part of your spiritual development. And very beautifully, Reverend Monroe defines spiritual disciplines as the habits by which our inner aspirations are manifested in outward actions. I'll say that again. Spiritual disciplines are the habits by which our inner aspirations are manifested in outward actions. And Reverend Monroe suggests that for the 19th century Unitarians, spiritual disciplines were simple living, immersion in nature, contemplation, reading, journal writing, and community education. From Elizabeth Peabody to Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, both the individual practices of journaling, immersion in nature, study of Scripture was balanced with common community works, starting schools, gathering groups of people to reflect and make meaning, to try to work to change the laws, to dismantle the slavery regime in the country. For comparison, in the Roman Catholic tradition, the people often talk about spiritual disciplines as the corporal works of mercy, the corporal or embodied works of mercy. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, shelter the homeless. In some translations, like our Christmas Eve service, welcome the stranger. Visit the sick, visit the prisoners, bury the dead, give alms to the poor. And the notion of spiritual disciplines, habits, and actions for individuals and groups, it's not limited to Christianity. In Islam, there are long traditions of mysticism, almsgiving, rigorous daily prayer, and habits of reflection. The Muslim chaplaincy at Harvard writes that spiritual transformation in Islam occurs through 4 stages. The first is certainty and faith. The second is ethical practice in all spheres of behavior. The third is the liberation and the discipline, the habits of the conscious decision. And the fourth is demonstrating the best and the most virtuous action for a given moment. Imam Khalid Latif, who's a chaplain with the NYPD, has spoken movingly about the discipline of the conscious decision, recalling the first time he went to a hospital after someone was shot. And as a chaplain, he was called to support them. Latif asks, what are the values that I live by, when he encountered this family in deep grief? What does real selflessness mean to me? And he continues, you know what? What does it really mean to serve those you're serving? What's noticeable across traditions, Unitarian, Catholic, Islamic, is that all of us talk about the integration and the balance of individual and communal action, spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines. These aspirations are at their best, both individual habits and invitations to the gathered community. I resonate with the poet Elaine Ecke, who writes about spiritual practices as seeking something much bigger than myself, something intangible yet real. And whether you call that an encounter with the Spirit or with silence, we all need it. The legacy of our ancestors in faith, both the broad idea of the sacredness of nature and the individual habits of self-culture, that's still with us. And whether you are looking at the Unitarians in India who share the motto, keep on progressing, or the Canadian Unitarian Council who, like us, revere nature and call to dismantle racism and all barriers to notions of growth, change, improvement. Change and habits of reflection are part of who we are. They need to be. And we live in a culture that tries to keep us so busy, that gives us the temptation to look at our phones until like 12 o'clock at night. Why would you do that? Why do I do that? If I update the New York Times app, nothing really is changing. But I feel like I'm accomplishing something, when really my mind is getting full. My mind is getting so full that I cannot think clearly about how to respond to the aches in the world. My mind is so full that I am unable to be present because there's a 5-minute update. I better look at it. Why? One spiritual discipline that I have begun this year, haven't made it every day, but is a 20-minute walk. I don't listen to music. I don't call anyone to catch up. I just literally walk for 20 minutes. And the silence is amazing. And there are no notification updates. And I'm not looking at a Zoom screen. But there's something amazing that happens in that silence. I feel better. I can bring a more full version of myself into conversations, to my relationships, at home. And in this particularly tumultuous time that we live, where there are wars and rumors of wars, where there are demagogues and political violence, where our very children are scared of shootings at their schools, where New York City has individuals saying there's not enough room for immigrants, we're in a really tense moment. And the temptation is to feel busy in response to that moment. But almost conversely, in order to be present to what is happening, even if it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, we need to slow down. And if we don't, we'll be like the priest and the Levite who saw this bloody person on the side of the road and went, I have to get to the meeting. I have so many things to do. That might be true. And that person's still hurting. And it's not always as dramatic as that instance, but in our personal lives, who are we walking by? In our town, who are we walking by? There is a beautiful book called Everyday Spiritual Practice, which includes dozens of essays by Unitarian Universalist clergy on different spiritual disciplines. And if you're interested, you can speak with me afterwards. I'll see if I can get a copy. The book explores everything from sacred reading, intentional time with sacred texts, to vegetarianism, from quilting to contemplative prayer, from anti-racism to hospital chaplaincy, as a spiritual practice and a site of maturing and deepening. Our spiritual habits don't have to be the same, but we should spend time thinking about what we are called to as individuals, and tend to our communal gatherings where we light our chalice, where we share our joys and sorrows, where we have moments of calm and quiet and song. Some of the communal spiritual practices of this community are our arts community, which created the snowflakes, which you'll see in the fellowship hall, our gatherings on Sunday, the work to support the food pantry here in Croton, which serves over 150 households and over 500 people, the peace vigil that our choir sang at last Sunday at the Episcopal Church in town. All of these are examples of embodied spiritual practice. And we can become unbalanced if we're just doing community work or just doing individual, but they both deserve love, attention, and care. Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, who's the president of our Pacific Seminary, Star King School of Ministry, did a beautiful interview with Coretta Scott King at one point. And in that, she discussed with Coretta her experiences of Unitarian Universalism. And while Dr. King and Coretta were in Boston, sometimes they did actually attend Unitarian congregations. But one thing that Bray McNatt shared was a reflection Dr. King wrote later on religious liberalism. And he said, "One phase of liberalism I always hope to cherish is its devotion to the search for truth, its refusal to abandon the best light of reason." But he said, it was the doctrine, the liberal doctrine of humanity that I often question. The more I observe the tragedies of history, our inclination in humanity to often choose the low road, I came to feel that liberalism at times had been all too sentimental concerning human nature, and then it leaned to a false idealism. That superficial optimism, he called it. And Coretta kind of suggests that was it. Like, we like it, we see it, there was a voice there, but what do you do in the hard times? And as a movement at different phases in our history, we've leaned into spiritual disciplines, and then at other points we've walked away from them and said, like, oh, you're just kind of on your own, figure it out. And that's something that even in my own faith practice I've struggled with. But through conversations with our community, through conversations with ministers who've been in our tradition for a long time, through conversations with chaplains who have been in hospitals for years, spiritual practice is necessary. Some of my favorite Unitarian Universalists burned out of our faith because they weren't able to find time to tend to their spirit, and they left in anger or they left in disappointment. All of us have the chance to grow in our community work and in our individual lives. And our tradition reminds us that a spiritual practice is an outward expression of our inner aspiration. Individual growth and community care are necessary and complementary. And we tell stories like the Good Samaritan to remind us to see outside of ourselves, to remember that some days we might be the avoidant priest, not helping someone. Some days we're the person struggling in a ditch that needs help and sees people walking by. And some days we have the ability to help. And some days we own the hotel where someone needs to stay. We all play different roles in the story at different times. but we all have a role to play. Reverend Kathleen McTeague ends her day asking this question. She says, at night, in the brief, peaceful moments between turning out the light and fall asleep, she asks, where was God this day? And she says it's a question, quote, that can be asked in a dozen different theological voices. And if God language fails to resonate, then simply ask, where today did I really hear the language of my life? The question puts a sheen of attentiveness and care on even the most mundane dimensions of the day. It gives us a way to cradle the moments of a day just lived and see them again before they're too far away, to notice the regrets and failings as well as the joys. That's her spiritual practice before she goes to bed. Where was God today? Where today did I really hear the language of my life? And just pause and give yourself 5 minutes. Our individual reflection illuminates our communal relationships. Self-care, community care. And like the Good Samaritan, at night, give yourself space to ask, where today did I really hear the language of my life? May we find peace. May we offer it. May we have moments of care and reflection. May it be so.
Each week, we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in the spirit of love and generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who have gone before, those that in their turn gave generously. Our offering goes to support the work of love and justice undertaken by this community. Today's offering will also be shared with the Emergency Shelter Partnership of Northern Westchester. UUCHV has joined with 8 other local houses of worship in providing a week of emergency shelter and food to those who have nowhere else to call home this winter. January's plate donations will go towards the meals that UUCHV will be providing during their hosting week. For more information, go to Emergency Shelter Partnerships or esp-ny.org. You can make your donation in several ways. If present in the sanctuary, you may give cash or check in the offering plate as it comes by. From your homes, you can make your donation via credit card or PayPal using the links provided in the e-newsletter, or by visiting our website, UUCHudsonvalley.org. Or if you prefer, you may always mail us a check. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering. The words are in your order of service. May these gifts and the work of our hands and hearts give power to all we stand for as a community of faith. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing our next hymn, number 343 in your gray hymnal, A Fire Mist and a Planet. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
May we continue on a journey to find our individual spiritual practice. May we have moments of silence and sacred time. May we find what truly makes us come alive and care for that space and place and time. May you grow in hope and love and connection now and in the days ahead. May it be so.